Q version 2. And we are live. Visual Canon, the age wave, and the false choice in Star Trek. Today, Trekland Tuesdays live, number 349. With me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you here from the heart of Trekland. Portal 47, and yes, Trekland Treks, your customizable custom away mission, personal away mission for here in Southern California. Home of all that. For once again, another Tuesday on Wednesday for some sanity, clarity, and the big picture in all things Star Trek. And oh boy, I'm going to get right into it today. But first, I want to say, if you are coming to us on a day delayed, thank you. No one will care later watching this, right? And hello, YouTube folks. Please make sure and comment on today's little soapbox. I bet you will. And then try to join us live sometime on Tuesday afternoon, right? We're global. But if you're with us right now, welcome. If you are new, sound off in the chat. We've got our great TTLers there. They will make you feel welcome. And if you're coming from wherever around the globe, we've got folks on many continents. Sound off, let us know how you are. How's the weather? What's going on? How's your Star Trek? Please do that, because the chat's about to blow up big time here. And I hope you folks watching later will do today, because there, I try to stay on top of things. I try not to be repetitive. I try not to repeat the general internet. I always say, Trekland, Dr. Trek tries to bring you not the same old, same old. Try to get ahead of trends. Try to connect dots in a different way. But I feel like today, I'm just going to have to get into this. But I'm going to bring you some dots that don't always all get connected. We may hit some points that have been in the news lately, but then I'm going to circle the wagons and bring us back around a couple things that maybe have not been said, have not been aired out. So bear with me, stay with me. I guess the channel's doing better because we've had more people showing up for this in comments later on. And Second Opinion, which is now weekly every time there's fresh Trek, right? Not a hot take, not a quick take, but a second opinion from Dr. Trek. I hope you're following along and watching that, because the comments there are starting to explode. And I guess the Trekland YouTube channel here is crossing back onto the radar, because we're starting to pick up comments from the folks that I thought had gone away over 7 years. Anyway, it's getting interesting. And again, I enjoy free speech. I enjoy an actual, honest, sincere exchange of opinions. It's when people, even if they're not paid trolls, even if they're not botting, if their whole psyche is about just doing the thing. I'm just amazed that people haven't changed their tune in 7 years. I just want to go, really? Really? Is this 2017 still? It's amazing. But you can't anticipate what people do with their time and their life, and a lot of it's sad, apparently. Again, I don't begrudge anybody their opinion. I'm just saying, if you feel the need to say the same opinion constantly for 7 or 8 years, maybe it's time to find something else in your life that's not just eating you up with negativity. And I'm saying all this because yes, we're going to go there today. We're going to go there today on Visual Canon and a look back at some of the things I've been saying over the years already, but maybe in a slightly different way. Because another intersecting point was a couple of news stories I saw this week, not about Visual Canon, but about Star Trek and favorites. And it gets back to the point. When I say the age wave, I mean the demo wave. Because this is the thing you hear me talk about: blinders and getting out of your comfort zone and your groove. Sometimes you're aware of it, but a lot of times with Star Trek, and in a world that moved slower, and in a world where we didn't have new Star Trek for 12 years, and in a world before that where we had so much new Star Trek, people couldn't keep up with it, and the audience divided, and the viewership for DS9 and Voyager shrank away until there was no handoff to Enterprise, from the highs of the 90s to the lows of the aughts, and then nothingness. I mean, it's always a shifting, evolving picture. We all committed our own time to Star Trek, no matter where across the decades that was. And I always say, you never forget your first. And that was one of the first respect points for even the JJ movies, even the Kelvinverse. And I say that more about the science of math. I got over my guilt about not caring more about the Kelvins when I realized there would never be more than maybe 4 movies. And I said this as I grappled my way to figuring out why me, a long-line fan, booster, someone who knows that, not a shill, but if you actively root for the doom of any Star Trek entry, then you're going to be hurting the franchise. And maybe you can afford to sit back and play perfect God and wait for the absolute perfect combination of producer, writer, actors, cast, design team. Maybe you can afford to sit back and do that, but the real world doesn't, because the real world is still capitalism based, and there are bean counters and there are mundane suits who don't know anything about Star Trek, unfortunately. And we treasure it when one of them sneaks in to take over and get the keys. But that's not always. Sometimes we have to have the enablers do it to let those people get the keys. And when we have it and all the gears are turning together, we have the well-oiled machine. Oh, it is Star Trek. It is Star Trek. What's a heaven in Star Trek? Nirvana, but that's so mundanely Earth. That's not always the case. And we have to just do what we can to wait through. And it's amazing what happens as the eras go by. I'm saying all this because of all things, I call it the Breen episode, right? Mirrors last week seemed to have brought all this out. Now, I'm telling you, if you watch Second Opinion, just as if I talk here, and I tell the Portales this when we're all in our Portal 47 club meetings, I will call a spade. I will critique something when I feel critique worthy. Maybe I won't rant on and on and on about it, but I'm not a vanilla person. And very few Star Trek is so chef's kiss that there's not something you can say, even if you view it not as I'm going to bash it because I hate it, which is the extreme position that never gets you anywhere, or it's like a yes and in improv. Okay, and you say, well, here's what was disappointing, and most of all, here's what I would have done differently. But apparently, still a chunk of fandom, and I'm so flattered and honored that they seem to have found me. You can go read comments in Second Opinion this week, but a lot of people, while I was amazed, and it was safe territory for a new Star Trek to take. The Breen. Okay, the Kellerans too. But the Breen. I was so, I don't say overcome, but I was so tickled to see so much finally solving the mystery of what the Breen helmet was. And then it wasn't just about cold, because that was going to be problematic. It smacks of another long-running canon mystery that I will get into in a minute, but it was really a different take. It was hearkening back to an Earth paradigm with deep sea insect life and deep sea fish life, marine life, and then also just the variety, the universality, the variety of God's creation, if you want to go there. But the diversity of all life, not just sentient life. The whole thing about the exoskeleton, the exo layer being soft or hard, and then blending into a cultural effect, ramifications, and over centuries and millennia. And I was so taken up with all that from the episode, plus the, human dramatic story of the characters and the other bits, that I didn't even think about the Enterprise sets and the ISS Enterprise, aside from the fact that, they did it to save money to advertise they used the strange new sets. But apparently this really triggered some of our friends in the audience who once again brought it up that this was crazy, that this was the ISS Enterprise. Now, about design canon, and we've gone back to the whole 1960s bridge and design versus the teens and 20s design. So I'm going to say 3 or 4 things here, and then we're going to leapfrog into something else, but I want to get through all of this. Number one, because people use those points, those dots, those triggers to get back to the whole big picture about how modern Trek, it must be an alternate universe because it doesn't feel right. And I agree. Here's the thing, kids. I agree with a lot of this. On the surface, in the gut moment that you bring all your past Trek to it, I agree. But that's not the end of it. That's your first gut reaction. Okay. I want to go, because here's the thing. And let me go big picture on this first. I've seen people even bring up the Leonard Nimoy quote, where on the surface, it appears that Leonard is bashing trivia folks, bashing Canon people. He even uses the C word. And he says, well, the thing about people who only talk about Canon are that they're very petty and they just want to hold something over people who aren't as versed in it. Which, to me, to hear someone say that, it's like hearing anybody. We've heard Shatner take a lot of hits over saying things that shocked a chunk of the world, somewhere on the PC scale, if not the fandom PC scale. I remember times when, this is hard to believe, but right after Next Generation, Patrick said some outrageous things at conventions and live things, and I just chalked it up as the angst of the actor making a pivot in life and not knowing what's next. This is when he did some mean things on stage, especially to a little girl in the audience at the Grand Slam, when the next thing on the horizon was him playing a gay second banana in Jeffrey. I mean, the X-Men was way in the future. The Generations was happening. But anything besides Star Trek, I would even, we've seen angst and career uncertainty make, and writers and all of our creatives, we all say unfortunate things out loud, and sometimes it comes from where we are. Okay. Leonard's quote here, I never see what the context is. I never see if he was answering somebody. If he was answering a stupid, petty situation, that could well have been his answer. But I see that quote, and now it's even been memeified, used as a cudgel to bash people. And we talk so much about gatekeeping, and I think of the broad swath of fandom because my moods change. My moods have changed over time. They have to, because Star Trek has changed, the world has changed, and I've changed over time. And all those people that swore they could never keep up with DS9 because they missed 2 shows and the damn thing went there. It was all the paradigm of how old they were. And you live in a world where it's you VCR it, you record it on your tape, or you've missed the episode and it's weekly, right? We live in a world with binge watching and instant availability now. The entire library. That's doesn't even make sense anymore. It's like explaining to a kid why you didn't make phone calls, why you didn't call people long distance because of the time. And if you did, you had to get up at 7 a.m. or 11 at night and not wake the person up. I mean, young people nobody understand. Like, what? A call's a call. It's no big deal. A call is one of the 47 things you can do with this device. And those are the things that affected people's opinions of shows. Okay, there's so many layers to this. Leonard's quote, number one, I don't know the context, who he was answering, what was going on. I know Leonard obviously did not care about bashing canon and continuity because he spoke up for it himself. How many times did Leonard speak up for the continuity of Spock? How many times did he change his mind about whether he wanted to play Spock or not? And I'm not bashing Leonard. That's the reality that we're all in. Now, if you can find me 5 or 6 or 7 times he said something to this effect, okay. But the upshot of this is people are using that meme to go bash the Canonistas. And as I say on the Trek Files, I say the term Canonistas lovingly because I came across that 10, 15 years ago before it got weaponized to talk about people who were canon devils who bashed that over themes and diversity and inclusion and whatever, all the hopeful, optimistic, aspirational aspects of Star Trek, which we all enjoy, but we all have our favorites. We all have our thing we go to beforehand. And we all have our thing we go to celebrate Star Trek. The original generation was all about fan fiction writing. It was all about fan fiction and zine. And that's the organized structure that clubs and then conventions largely came out of. A little bit on the vendors, dealers side. But that was the 2 camps. But yes, costume making, cosplay now, costumes, props, models, filling in the gaps of the universe. So when people use that today, when people rise up to say, this upsets me, it must be a different timeline because it doesn't make sense. And another half of the fandom who are so quick to talk about gatekeeping rightly as a term, it doesn't make you can have you can both be mutually shooting each other about what's more important. And that is silly. I never denigrated shipping and the character work and the character building. It just wasn't the thing that was my turn on, but I appreciated it. I wasn't going to be as invested in the background of a show that had stupid writing and stupid characters. So if this is some perverse way of saying that I had the privilege of having a fairly stable middle-class white life to where some aspect of angst, whether it was worry about Vietnam and nuclear war and ecology, I mean, I was worried those were all issues, but I wasn't personally bound up with them with anxiety. And I didn't have, thankfully, and bless my heart, I'm so thankful that I didn't have a personal life that was so dominated that the stability that Star Trek represented to so many people, sometimes it was a health issue. Sometimes it was just the hell they might have been living in their personal life, and the rationality, much less the personality and charisma of the actors and the characters, and just seeing Spock be rational and knowing that was such a rarity in their own personal life. So many people clung to Vulcans and rationality because of that. They saw that. Or just in the world at large, the culture at large, with that insanity of a war, insanity of pollution, insanity of racial hatred and inequality. And that was their thing. We all come to it. And I recognize that. But when you're 14 and 15 and 16, you're not thinking in big terms like that. Maybe you are. All I'm saying here is the thing that pulled me into Star Trek in a world where I loved history, I loved NASA, and I read, and storytelling was not unknown to me. But that's what the hook was to me. I wanted to fill those gaps. Why didn't the tech manual have a page for everything? Well, because it wasn't financially feasible. You had to put a limit. You had to do something. You had to make some choices. You couldn't do everything. But when you're a kid, you want it all. And when I was a volunteer for the Well Committee in the pre-computer days, and fandom was stamps and paper driven, and SACs, self-addressed stamps, that's the first thing I reached out for. I had a list of the 8-page letter with just question. And the poor people that were trying to answer me, I always think of them when I'm answering people's questions, whether it's in Portal 47 and it's a business now, or whether we're just in some comment thread. Because this is the thing, getting back to Leonard's quote. People that, number one, I'm gonna anti-gatekeep here for canonistas and background fans. It is important to them. The show is important to them. They care, and they care about that, and they don't want to see a change that's beyond the pale of what they think can be assimilated. Now, that can be short-sighted too, because we've come so far. And I am very mindful of being on the other side of the fence when all the original series fans whose world was Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and Star Trek, and they saw these new actors, even though it was set very ingeniously. So thank you, Gene, and also David Gerald, and Dorothy Fontana, and everybody else there in the think tank that we talk about all the time, Bob Justman that we talk about, Susan Sackett, Richard Arnold at the time too, unofficially on the side, but in Gene's ear. We talk about the genius move to break open Next Gen so that it was not just a reboot and it wasn't a redo. It was an expansion of the universe, and nobody got it. At the time, it was just, here's a safe way to have more Star Trek without insulting the old cast or putting them out to pasture prematurely and pissing off the fandom, who at the time, Star Trek fandom was 100% original series fandom, because that's all there was. Of course you didn't piss them off. It's 1986. They still had 3 movies left in them before they were put out to pasture. And even then they came back for guest star appearances. And I'm being crass here because that was the wordage used. It was a genius move at the time to avoid recasting the original roles. Well, How do we avoid that problem? We just come up with different roles, a different character set. And to create space, we're going to put ours even in the future, because it has been 20 years, and TV technology and design and cinematography and just the way we do things, the movies look so different than the TV series. And it's not just about having a movie time, pacing, structure, budget. And it took 3 seasons, Yesterday's Enterprise. And I remember thinking, oh my God, the Next Generation as a series has finally eclipsed what the movies could do, even as movies with a movie budget. In a 2-hour format, not weekly episodes, but all the resources and the benefits and bonuses of a movie versus a series episode, a single episode. Even a 1-hour movie or a 2-part TV episode, if you want to have the time the same, apples to apples. No, that 1-hour episode was so amazing. Half a season before Best of Both Worlds, I was blown away by Yesterday's Enterprise. And that's why it perennially stuck at the top of favorite episode and was neck and neck with Best of Both Worlds. People think, oh, Best of Both Worlds. And that's where the ratings blew up over the summer. People found it. Star Trek really took off and into the 4th and 5th season, Next Generation, I mean. But that was me. So when I hear people say, oh, you visual folks who are upset about the changes, get over it. The audiences have changed. No one's going to do something from the 60s and expect it to fly. We've talked about this before. Number one, the fact that people just care about that's half a fandom. That's why I'm here. And I'm not denigrating the amazing storytelling, the great acting. Yes, I'm talking even the original series. Because for the people who today dish the original series, go look at what else was up against it in the 60s. There's a reason classics are classics. And maybe if you're not up with it, yeah, you have to get over the context of the times. But either go back and immerse yourself in that to talk intelligently about it, or maybe not talk so much about it, aside from, well, it was the 60s. Because you really want to see the 60s, go look at some of the other tripe that came and went in the 60s that it was up against. There's a reason why Gunsmoke and Bonanza and Perry Mason and on the drama side are still around, and they're in syndication. What the streaming channels now will show those. That was not the average. If that was the average of what was on TV at any given time, you'd have 5 times more series out there. But there was so much that was tripe and trash, and people weren't set out to do that. I mean, every era, it's the same thing right now. There are series on now that no one is going to care about in 5-6 years. People got a paycheck, people did jobs, and somebody had an idea they wanted to do it well. It doesn't always happen. Something is always rising to the top. That for so many years was the original series. It gave us it's easy to say, well, it led the way to everything else, and now we don't have to look at it. Well, that's true, but maybe you should. And maybe in looking at the context of the times, you wind up growing a little bit out of your own years. And you don't, I'm saying maybe eventually when you add up enough of your youth years and life proceeds, you see what was the best of the eras before you. And maybe that's why it's worth keeping up with. But people are going to be emotionally invested in those years, in that look, because not just the original series, but all through the Next Generation, when you had a flashback, you had a dream, you had a holodeck, Scotty recreates that look in Relics. That's what's a bedeviling point now. You have Trials and Tribulations. They time travel and match the Enterprise. And that's 100 years later. No one bats an eye. Cisco Dax waxes on and on about the look of the equipment from that, not the props, the equipment and the gear from that era. Oh, the black with the silver accents. And then, yes, In a Mirror Darkly, we have the original, not Enterprise, but the Defiant Constitution class stuck in the alternate future with the Thug. But it's interesting to look at that time, even in 2004 and 5, and even as, yes, Enterprise was canceled midstream on that. It was an amazing show. It always brought out the people, the visitors. Tribulations had everybody coming by to visit. So, same thing happened with In a Mirror Darkly. But even then, two memories of that because we were there covering it, taking pictures. Everybody had to go over and get their pictures taken. And yeah, you can find the pictures. David Goodman, you can find the pictures with Terry Metalis when he was Brandon's assistant. Everyone going over to take their pictures, get their selfies. And before we talked about the word selfie. But even then, Herman Zimmerman, production designer, all the staff, Mike, everybody, Doug, everybody who was on the show, there were tweaks. The red railings were rounded, not perfectly butted 2x4s. There was slight, even then they realized that the look was looking dated. And the fourth season of Enterprise was HD. There were slight motions in the big overhead poster view screens. There were tweaks that they made to try to ease it into, 30 years later's view, 40 years later's viewing. And even 10 years almost since it had been done for Tribulations. There'd been the revolution in HD TV by then. We were on the cusp of streaming. Not that affects the visual look. But they were cognizant that things needed to be updated a little bit. Tribulations did pioneer the idea that if things were less sophisticated models, sets, it's because we didn't have cameras on them. So when Greg Jean, late great Greg Jean, out of his own pocket, way over provided for what he was paid for, a half size of the Smithsonian now, the 11-foot original, built an all-new Enterprise and a not digital model with internal lights and the whole bit. Gary Hutzel, the whole visual effects, everybody helping out with that. Spinning lights and the nacelle caps and the Bassard collectors, all of that. And a K7 that we could actually see detail on. And a Klingon D7 that we could see, which wasn't even used in the original Tribbles episode. And pushing in on them to get level of detail for 1996 audiences with the caveat that, well, we never saw a D7, a Klingon battlecruiser, in Tribbles. They didn't even try to have one. They blew the wad on the station, and we never got close to the station. We're only now getting close to see the detail. The model didn't have the detail in 1967. This model did, but that was the caveat. That was the retcon of explaining it to make it more palatable to a 1996 audience, but to cover that. That's what you do, because the cover already was that. The consoles were so powerful, they were reprogrammable. No, there were no labels on the buttons. That's what Lost in Space would have done with a million blinkies that look like they're right out of mid-60s NASA that now look so dated. The models that look so smooth-sided, and Star Wars ruined us all for having greeblies and having all that texture to convey a small model looking really bigger than it was. Why did the simple models of original series in the 60s look so simple? Well, they were cheaper. They didn't have the money to do all that detailing. But what do we retcon for years and years? They were so powerful. They did, and the Federation was the force that it was. And yeah, the Klingon ships were more angular. Every alien race culture since then has been more angular than rounded. Round is good and maternal and organic, and angle and sharpie is scary and creepy and evil. And I'm broad brushing here, but that's the deal. And you could do that because, sure, they were powerful. Federation Starfleet ships were powerful, but they didn't have to show it. It was all under the panels, the hallway. Now, if you popped off a panel and spent $4,000 under there one episode, you want to get into all the gouda. And the original series too, with the original pioneering piped, in the 60s circuit boards glued down. Miss Uhura, I can think of no one better suited to handle this board. Thank you, sir. I mean, they would occasionally try to replicate that. Same thing in the 80s and the 90s, Next Gen and the other shows, when you had to pull off a panel, a Mies panel, and get into it. That was going to be bucks, but it was there. But the overall design aesthetic was, we don't have to show internals or externals. Okay, but sure, when you get close enough up, there are panels on the original Enterprise hull. Okay. All that to say, that's what made the shows for those people. I never denigrated. And I think most people, most canonistas, as opposed to Leonard's quote, some people are going to do that, but some people will do that with anything. They'll do it with sports trivia. They'll do it with whatever. They will take their knowledge and bash people over the head with it who don't know. You can't stop that. It's always going to infect from other things in their life are going to affect what is personal to them, and they will take whatever means a lot to them and use that as a cudgel. It could be this, it could be basket weaving, it could be quilt making, it could be stamp collecting, it could be whatever. That's going to happen. From my experience, most of the people who are Canonistas or Canon smoothers and gap fillers who just go ooh, and whether they're technically, whether they're ship pornistas or whether they're cosplayers, or whether the details is what they love. And not just the fact that they're anal detailists, but the fact that Star Trek cared enough to make you care. And that goes back to Gene and Dorothy and Bob. And the old thing about science fiction is looked upon askance right now as not serious. So we have to overcome the serious divide and make this as real as we can, and make these people on this ship in the future as real as we can. And of course, they're 20th century people reflecting us, elevated. But we're going to blow ourselves up. We're going to destroy our own platform if we are silly with our week-to-week continuity. And as a kid, the amazing thing wasn't that I sat there and went, ooh, phasers. The fact that the phaser was pretty much the same week to week to week to week to week. And the door out of the bridge was the same week to week to week. I didn't think of all this at the time. Not until you read the making of Star Trek, which is why it was so revolutionary too. You got sucked into the adventures and the meanings and the messages and the morals. And and it was well acted for the most part. You are sucked in on a surface level as a kid, as a first-time viewer. But the more you watch, the more you realize what was going on below the surface. And then you realize what was designed that wasn't part of the week's needs. The pre-planning included aspects that were not needed week to week in the story. They might never have come up in a story. You might never have known about anything until you heard someone interviewed and mentions this, or you see their memos, or you see their drawings, and you went, oh my God, they did this and never even used it. But that's a symbol of how much went into the show. And that is what the Canonistas respond to. And that's why that's why I've tried to bring every background creator out, because their work a lot of times never shows up. It never gets talked about. And part of it's because people don't know to ask until you get to the original paper, drawings, memos, whatever. And that's all a thing. So if people want to bash on the Canonistas, then you're taking away my childhood. And you're taking away that for a lot of people. They're into the show. And that doesn't mean that we're blind to the good that Star Trek meant to other people. It just meant that was our entry point, and we all have that. And that's the diversity of fandom. And don't you dare gatekeep on me. But at the same time, I understand the frustration of people who that's not their favorite. And to them, this all looks very shallow. And it's really unfortunate that the way things have evolved, number one, time goes by. We keep educating. I try to bring the context. I try to bring the receipts and the living history. Here's the letters. Here's the memos. Here's what people wrote in Starlog and Interstat, where they bashed Next Generation. The holy cast of Next Generation, how could that happen? It's perspective, it's time, it's where people are. You're leaving this paradigm to go to this one, and the years go by. And eventually it becomes not a moving fact of life, but a curiosity. Did you know that people used to refuse to watch The Next Generation because they thought it was erasing Kirk, Spock, and McCoy? People refused to watch The Next Generation if they'd been huge fans of the original because they thought they were just slapping Star Trek on something and expecting us to watch it. Yes, nothing new is under the sun. That was all there. I'm just saying. So, even when you see a quote from Nimoy, let's put it in context and realize that that's okay. Okay. And there is a thing as reverse gatekeeping. There's probably such a thing as reverse racism in limited situations. I'm not trying to equate these two things. I'm just saying that when people are passionate about the thing they love, and they're all supposed to be on the same page, the same franchise IP, and yet they have different favorite aspects, That should be something to celebrate. Boy, if ever there was a time for IDIC, that would be it. Instead of dividing and conquering and all that. There's enough of that going on in the world, much less within fandom. And that's what I wanted to get to here. The amazing thing about Star Trek is that it appealed to so many people on so many. Marshak and Lichtenfield's book, Star Trek talked about all these effects, the tailored effects, and how there were 6 or 8 different things that appealed to different aspects and wound up creating this huge audience with all these different threads that people could grab onto, or maybe more than one. Very few people, maybe all of them, but everybody had one major buy-in, attractant magnet to Star Trek. They called them the tailored effects, and each chapter was about all of that. But I think what makes Star Trek different than everything else, and here's where we get into the modern world, because at the time, I didn't think that. And Star Wars was, well, this is fun. It's exciting. It's a great movie, but it'll never replace Star Trek because there's so much in Star Trek and Star Wars. And it wasn't a competition. I wasn't keeping score. I just knew what was stacked with more depth and what wasn't. One was flashier and newer. And the minute Star Trek got a chance to have a movie, they'd catch up on those easy aspects. And we don't know how that's all played out. Star Trek just lost out on not having the coolest toys that would sit in your closet for 30 years and be passed down to your kids and create a much bigger fandom in the end. But to Leonard's quote, most canonistas I know do not bash everybody else over there with their knowledge. They don't make themselves, it's just the opposite. They want to share. They can't stop talking about it. They want everybody to know. They want to pull out the cool and the this and then that. Whether they're doing a CG model or an analog model, or they're doing a cosplay, they're building props, whatever they're doing, they want to share it. And I think underneath all of this is, for me, as the years go, we didn't think about all these. We didn't think about labels and buzzwords and categories and boxes. You just did it. And it's only been the last 10, 15 years when we had no Star Trek when it came back. There was the conflict again. First thing I thought of was the goofy times, people bashing Star Trek 2 but for killing Spock off and running that marketing survey that said you will lose X, the consumer militarism as a way to direct the flow of the movie. And even though you might say, well, it's protests and it can be negative, it did open eyeballs. It did get people to consider other aspects. Money talks in a lot of ways, but just sometimes the human reaction, even if something was going to go different, even if it doesn't go 180, it might veer off and go 90. And it's good. Audience reaction is good. Sometimes the audience reaction is so all over the board, you can't learn anything from it. But sometimes that does happen. And the folks that want to share, the folks who relish and revel and love Star Trek's background, and it makes them think what we aren't seeing, and it makes them project just as much as a science consultant is trying to project and talk about a phaser or a deflector shield or programmable matter, whatever that future projection would be. People are engaged, and some people's bit is projecting out on their own for what the show hasn't even gotten to. And just as much as a lot of people clung to the plots and the characters and the camaraderie and the chemistry, so many C words in Star Trek, and that was what was more important to them, not the visuals. For a lot of people, the human continuity and the visual continuity had the same effect in that you could depend on Star Trek. In a crazy world where things shift, politics, religion, your sports heroes might even give up on you. But you could depend on Star Trek, and that is partly why the characters create a sensation. If something is perceived, if you're going to kill off Spock, if you're going to do this, that, the other. Who wants to see Picard as an old man captain? That hurt a lot of people's sensibility, even though they apparently missed Wolverine. I think Picard did it better than Wolverine. People, it's not so much that they're against change, it's that they can depend on Star Trek to not be insane. They can depend on Star Trek not to be all over the board. They can depend on Star Trek not to let them down. And when it does, or they perceive it to be, they are hurt. And if you want to say, well, that's not a healthy thing to be, that may be what some people, and look at Susan Sackett's Letters to Star Trek book in the 70s, talked about people medically, mental health wise, survival in the middle of the jungles against the Viet Cong and the Vietnam War. The universality and survival and dependability of Star Trek has meant so much in so many different ways to so many people. So when you take somebody's dependability, and whether it's passion, recreation, or it's more than that, and who's to judge in a case-by-case basis if that's healthy or not? Sometimes it's all people have at a certain point in their life. And you're always reading about those people and people giving their testimonial. Now, is that, and we all go, oh, that's amazing. Thank goodness that had that, right? Jimmy Doohan used to talk the story about the girl near suicide, and Scotty saved her, and she wrote to him back, right? And he stayed up with her famously for years and years after that. That's a wonderful story, and that's replicated with all the casts and all the generations now. It's just the original series cast had 20 years themselves when this was new and fresh, and even to some eyes weird and strange. But now we know what pop culture is, and so much of the rest of life isn't dependable. And it has let people down, and people can lean on their pop culture heroes. And they do sound off when they perceive they've been slighted or altered in a way that's not comfortable and letting them down. And sometimes change comes just from people not being aware of this, or different weights given. And yes, the modern era, I felt let down by the visual choices. The problem is I understand what's going on. It's everybody wants to be creative. Everybody wants to live in the now. Everyone wants in the moment and show off. They want to win awards. They want to do this. And most of them are aware. They don't want to be the one to mess up Star Trek. They don't want to be the one to be ballyhooed and hooted at. But they're not always aware. And we all know the mix of creatives working on these shows. Sometimes they're huge fans. Sometimes they don't know anything. And sometimes they know, but they don't know as much as they might know. And the more intelligent ones grab people in the room. You heard Carlos Cisco talk about on Seventh Rule. If you didn't, go listen to that this week in The Breen, talking about how, no, he was not a fan. He knew everybody, it works in media, knows Star Trek is out there. And now, as opposed to 30 years ago, they know it's a huge money-making franchise and that it's affected things. And people now know that if you work on Star Trek, even if you're not making a living from it, 40 and 50 years from now, two things. One, your work will still be scrutinized, so don't F it up, at least to your ability. And B, you will probably still be talking about the Star Trek you did when you're 20s, you'll probably in your 60s and 70s and still talking about it. So that's that side of the fence. It's just like, in general, the old phrase, nobody sets out to make a bad movie or make a bad TV show. People all want to do their best. Sometimes it's just their awareness and their guidance. And I know out of the gate with Discovery, there was a dual emphasis of let's make things better, change it. Here's what I've always wanted to do differently. A lot of that was Brian's thinking. And a lot of it was the more attention by more people. They say canon, they're talking about concept canon. That's why people were attacking making Michael the unknown foster sister of Spock, not sister, foster sister. Well, Sybok was a half brother that people, a certain section of fandom, were pissed about in 1990, which led to the denigration of Star Trek V on top of everything else. But it's not exactly precedent. It's happened before. And the extreme surgical precision care of inserting Michael into the Sarek family, and then eventually how it all wound up reflecting back on Sarek and Amanda, and whoa, it explains so much. The best part of early Discovery to me was the not rebooting Sarek and Amanda and the Spock family, but just totally adding the way you would want new layers of texture, that whole aspect. Now, and I know I've been all over the place today, but I'm trying to wrap my arms around all of this. The other thing that's wacky about this is there is a two-sided bit. They're the people that will never, ever forgive Kurtzman era Trek, the redo of the original series Enterprise Bridge. I was taken aback. I knew in my head I had to find a way around it. And that will be a fight that may go on forever. It all came back in with the Breen, with the ISS. The fact that this is a ship 800 years in the future, the fact that it was the Mirror Universe Enterprise, the fact that it had been taken over by rebels who even took over and moved in with not technological bits. They were rebel refugees to get away from the Mirror and try to cross the universal gap, which is amazing to me. Talk about refugees crossing the Mediterranean to get to Europe. Here's people trying to cross the quantum divide to get away. And lots of things could have happened to that ship in 800 years. That wasn't the problem. But basically, the trigger was there and people came out. And it was another reason to... And am I disappointed that the Discovery and Strange New Worlds Enterprise doesn't fit closer to the 60s bridge? Of course I am. Am I stupid and I don't know that 2017 audiences won't accept what a 1960... I do. I've said this before. If I had been in charge, I would have seen that as a false choice. Hey, kids, is it a dessert topping? Is it a floor wax? Hey, it's both. If you like your Saturday Night Live old classic commercials, it can be both, because I said forever, design is different than cinematography. And that's what I thought In a Mere Darkness was starting to show. You can make tweaks, but it's how you film it, light it, edit it, pace it. And the old go-to example, as we said many times, is we will always do World War II movies. But the moment a producer decides that the tanks, the logos on the tanks should be modernized, made more... The minute that somebody decides that German helmet look, we can improve on that. The minute you start changing history, then you're, whatever decade some decades you had clean shaven soldiers out in the field. I used to hoot at that if it was low budget. Then in the 70s, everything got gritty and sweaty. And if somebody was dirty, there wasn't just a little smack of dirt on their face. Oh, look, he's been out in the dirt. He must be a soldier in the trenches. No, things got so raunchy, dirty, sweaty in the 70s. It's like they rebelled out of the studio system and had sweaty, dirty, hunky, bloody, gory effects for war movies. The different eras of production look and sound differently, but no one changed the logo, the white cross on the star on an American tank, or the cross on a German tank, or the difference between American and German helmets. Nobody changed that. It's how it was. That's what could have been the answer for Star Trek. We've retconned reprogrammable buttons. We could have seen that in action. We could have seen not plywood sharp corners. We could have seen rounded edges. We could have seen a variety of materials, much less the lighting and all of that. All could have been done. But here's the biggest point of all. It wasn't. And, no pun intended here, but kids, that ship has sailed. We're beyond that. So you're left with 2 or 3 choices. Yes, it pained me not to go there. Yes, I preach texture, not trivia. That's what we're left with now. So either the easiest thing to say is, oh, it's a different universe and a different timeline. Well, maybe 20 and 30 and 40 years from now, maybe that's what the ultimate decision is made to be. Maybe we've got a third timeline here, and the people who are screaming for that, maybe that eventually becomes what they want. Or my first go-to was that the 60s, the preponderance, the move, the flow, the years are going to be in favor of the way things now. And the more time goes by, the more the actual pristine 60s episodes are going to be the anomaly. And you'll still have to explain why relics and especially why tribulations and In a Mere Darkly. But my temporary retcon was those are the fictional adventure versions that Kirk talks about in his foreword to the novelization that Gene, it was cute at the time. that Kirk talks about the dramatized adventures of his crew may have affected public, like the dime novels glorified all the Wild West heroes and villains and made legends of all these guys, Bat Masterson and Billy the Kid and on down and on down and on down. Doc Holliday and the gunfight at the OK Corral, all of that. Like, what was the truth and what was real about all these glorified people? It was the subject matter of the short-lived TV show Legend that Michael Piller tried to create and only ran 13 episodes, sadly. You could have the 23rd century version of that, and that would explain the 60s decor. And in reality, this is because that was that was their equivalent of a budget of limited means. That was something easy to hang your hat on. Or now we've got this rolling effect of all the temporal incursions, starting with transparent aluminum and the whales, and going forward. I don't know that Naked Time did that much. And Sitting on Edge of Forever seems to have actually been a button up. But we've had enough incursions back and forth that now Akiva Goldsman, some of the rest are talking about, Terry, we're talking about how the ripples in time are going to be affected as we go back. Time travel affects loops. And now we as an audience come to see things, and things are different, that the technology wave arrives faster, that the eugenics wars aren't after years of doing it, the eugenics wars have been pushed back. World War III is pushed back because we are literally leaning into that. And that's the other thing. We knew that was going to happen eventually. Kids, the big thing is going to be in 30, 40, 50 years, when we actually develop a faster than light drive, the Q-Bear engine, whatever. And it has nothing to do with some lattice crystalline element called dilithium. It's like, what is that? When we have hyperlight drive, fastest speed of light, however it's computed and scored and however it's created, it will have nothing to do with our Canon, carefully constructed after all the decades, way of warp drive. Maybe it'll involve some kind of a subspace bubble. I dare say that unless we really do discover dilithium on the 5th moon of Jupiter. But, Zephram Cochrane made his Warp 1 flight without dilithium. But at that point, it will be like game over, because that's like the core tenet of all Star Trek, right? Even the burn will be like, well, then what blew up in the burn? What did that alien kid scream about? Wasn't dilithium. I mean, everything top to bottom. So you can wait for the Vulcans to get here. I'm waiting for warp drive to get invented, because maybe then emotionally we turn the corner on Star Trek and this attachment to it. Because here's the other thing. When people rise up to talk about that, and I'm not talking about the hateful, stupid, uncivil, crude, crass, hammer throwing, bashing defense of this false choice. The false choice that we should have had both. The ship has sailed. Let's come up with a reason why and move on. And it may be that the temporal that they're all correct. Everything is good, but the way it is because we're looking at version 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to say that's inevitable, because inevitably we're going to have warp drive without dilithium. Just to say one thing. Just to go for one example. That will be sad. But it's the kind of thing that, okay, when people bash this desire to change and alter and come up with a reason, that gets the people that could always depend on Star Trek are going to be disappointed. But here's the other thing. We have lived through this before, too, because somebody asked me this in the magazine column, Fistful of Dollars, in your Star Trek Explorer magazine. Get yours today. And yes, you can get a digital edition if you don't want paper. Someone said, when the Klingons were changed for the motion picture, because everybody knew they had budget and they wanted to be more alien, and Gene got to do the design choices he really wanted to do all along but couldn't because of money and time, was there an uproar in fandom? And searching my mind, I want to say no. People were saying, well, of course, people got it. Of course, this is more money. Movie time and scale and pace and budget can allow them to be not glorified Fu Manchus and Ming the Merciless, right? and not wearing uniforms and things that just accented their human actorness underneath with a black undershirt and a gold jerkin. We were conscious of it, but we didn't fight it. But the more the years went by, concerned, curious people wanted to know. Choosy mothers wanted to know, why is the difference? What is the difference? It's Star Trek. There must be a difference. They stuck to themselves. It was an enclave. The outside world didn't go, that's a stupid thing to worry about. Just enjoy the story. Nobody even knew this was a question for years. And I answered the question by showing the original FASA. They came up with the first retcon of what was going on. They said that the humans we saw in the original series were a human-Klingon fusion that the Klingons came up with to be on the front line of their human interface. So they wouldn't look too scary, but that they were struggling, flailing to get an answer. And if you played those games at the time, you know all about the Klingon Imperial and the Klingon fusion. The actual Klingons look like our revolution. And all the there's different head skulls and all of that. And the weird thing about L'Rell's head changing, maybe she had cosmetic surgery. I get that as they evolved, and that whole political thing about the Klingons, and then they course corrected, and then people were mad because of the course correction. We can at least say species diversity. At least those aren't, aside from L'Rell and a few others. And DS9 already coming up with updating, Kang, Koloth, and Kor, and people getting over that. But still, the uber fans on staff, when it came time for Tribulations, Ron and Renee, Ron D. Moore, Renee Echeverria, wanted to address, because you had Worf, and you had to match film from the Tribble. That came up. And they wanted to explain the thing for real. They realized it was going to get convoluted, and it was way too much to bog down the rest of the story that we all know, which was great. You couldn't insert into that in a line or two. So they throw in the joke line, which in many ways made it worse because now it was on the radar screen. You couldn't blow it off. It's just a production thing. Ignore it. Get over it. You anal background fans, you. So now it had to be addressed. And then it fell to the next time a huge anal fanboy and number 2 and number 3 were running a show when Manny Cotto got the key. The late, great Manny Cotto got the keys. Mike Sussman, the rest of the staff said, okay, here is our chance as the clock ticks down on people having Star Trek keys for a while, knowing they were canceled. Let's finally fix this. And it was convoluted, but it makes sense. And you know what? The longer we've been dealing with it, the more we're comfortable with it. And you know what? They even made the augment and tied into the Soongs and set up, for better or for worse, all the Soong storylines, the Soong family as a concept, with Brent having employment for life, apparently. And the whole lineage of the Soong family and their travails into AI and to android building and eugenics and changing course out of that. All of that got set up by this thing that grew out of people wanting to talk about the Klingon augment, coming up with the Klingon augment virus as a way to explain the thing. So for 30 years, a big chunk of the world had said, oh, it's not worth messing with. Just move on. It was a production change, bigger budget. Of course, we all know what it was. But the canonistas among us, including the pro ranks, came up with that. And look what it all yielded. Texture, not trivia. You take the weird thing and then suddenly it is not weird. You explain why it's an oddity. Maybe it's not. As far as I know, every single aspect of 300 years of Star Trek history in real life has not been on film, and we are not exposed to it yet. So there's plenty of open corridors to that. So back to my point here. The people rising up again who are pissed that the designs were changed. And then the segment of fandom who's making fun of them, saying, sit down, shut up, go back to your corner. Why do you care about this? Move on. No one wants to see a 60s design in 2017. Those are all false choices. They didn't have to be made. But the ship has sailed. They have been. Something eventually will come up to talk about it. So number one, we are not going to, as long as we are human and we are civil, we're not going to denigrate anybody's viewpoint on their favorite. We're not going to forget that when people's favorites are messed with, they get emotional and passionate about it. We want to remind people when they're in the middle of being emotional and passionate that they owe people some respect about it if they get mutual respect back. And number two, nothing is set in stone. And all the people that made fun of people wanting to come up with a Klingon makeup change reason, eventually it happened. And it's begat all this other texture to play with. That's what happens when you have the luxury of a 60-year-old and counting franchise. You're going to have eras and pendulum swings and different attitudes, and you're going to have different people running the shows. And you're going to have different people at the top with the hands-on people below them. And right now, we're in the middle of a timey-wimey wobbly thing here, not just about how the Enterprise bridge looks and doesn't, but what is the nature of this temporal wave going through? What's going to happen? My initial disappointment right now is that if we're going to depend on the biggest downside of the temporal incursions making things unchanged is that whole you can always depend on Star Trek, that's gone. That makes me easy queasy, and I wonder if I will care. And I wonder if hundreds of thousands of other people will care if you unmoor Star Trek from its underpinnings and go there. Now, maybe this gets delved into and refined and treated enough to where it becomes a powerful storytelling tool, a powerful grounding. And just like when we see with Shattered, or we see with Face the Strange, we know well enough that people use those. It's the Spider-Verse across the universe. If you go from the fact that you rebooted 3 times with 3 different actors playing Spider-Man to the point where you are so comfortable with it that you use it, maybe we get back to that. Maybe that becomes, and I'm not saying that we wind up with the different quantum universes, that 60s Trek is in one prime timeline and there's prime 2 that is now. That may not necessarily be the place to go, but some way enough time goes by, enough comfort zone, and here's the thing, enough change or evolution in those in charge with the keys happens that eventually something is invented to come up with the reason why. But I'll tell you right now, my first reaction is if we resort to the temporality, the incursions having changed things from what we knew before, and we're just looking at different, then that's disappointing because now Star Trek is not grounded. I can't depend on the Star Trek that I knew. And yes, of course, there'll be aspirational, wonderful stories championing diversity. And all the people who look to Star Trek for that will still get that. But the underpinning for the fandom won't be there. And in the big picture, and this is something that I've had to come up with the last 10 years or so, as the MCU, as all things comic books became huge with Hollywood getting involved, as Star Wars got bigger and bigger and finally figured out that they really wanted to have series, that's one way to expand their universe. They just need to have more than one hit series for that. Of course, the Uber fans are going to love all of these. And I mean, that's as those other franchises got huge, as Harry Potter huge and blew up and then shrank and maybe come back. Anyways, all these other franchises are out there competing with Star Trek that, aside from Doctor Who, yes, although Star Trek showed Doctor Who how to market, nobody can even compare to Star Trek, maybe aside from Doctor Who, as far as longevity and as far as impact in the world. Star Trek, as we know, helped George get over his funding fence and get the original Star Wars made. Why Star Trek? The one thing that sets it apart from all these amazing, exciting franchises, IPs that make millions of people want to be so invested. And why Star Trek was drifting away and it's come back and it could never drift away totally. It just needed people to wake up, its handlers to wake up and do it right. Star Trek is the one that has always tried to be grounded. Star Trek is the one that didn't reboot every 2 years. Star Trek is the one that hasn't had 18 Batmobiles. And that's fine for everybody else. Star Trek, that was the most unique thing about Star Trek. That and its science grounding. And yes, Doctor Who, again, accidentally, again. How do you deal with the real life recast? You create the whole background DNA of the Doctor regenerates. So now Doctor Who is the franchise best equipped to be around for thousands of years. You just keep, and I know, and we went through the limit was it 13? They've retconned around that, which was making people mad at the time. Okay, but did you really? If you didn't, then your alternative was to never have more. Oh, we've gone through 13, yay! Be like Dingaling and his 10 movies, and now he can't decide on the 10th movie, and he'll decide on his 10th movie for the next 40 years. Is that going to be the artificial limit, the false choice? It's the thing to look forward to for the future. The pendulum's going to swing. Different people are going to be in charge. At some time down the line, someone will say, yes, it's time to explain the Klingon makeup. Yes, it's time to explain the different Klingon Enterprise bridges by this method or the other. And maybe we don't keep using temporal wave incursions from time travel as our wobbly reason, but we come up with an overarching framework to support it. I hope I live long enough to see that, because right now when I hear that excuse, I want to say, well, what's the big game plan? And of course there isn't one as far as I can tell. That's why I'm so itchy to see what we're doing here, because if the thing is just to kick the eugenics wars can and the World War III can down the road, are we going to put off first contact with the Vulcans? Is that going to eventually, when we get closer to the real, 2061, are we going to kick that can down the road too, when there aren't Vulcans showing up on April 4th and 5th, 21? Because it will happen. And we can't do, that's the 90s passed, and Greg Cox madly retconned the eugenics wars into being the underground war the rest of us didn't really know about. And okay, I think half the world didn't even know that was out there. But it's just maybe a matter of time, because that's one thing that is no one's fault. We are kids. The Bell riots are in 4 months? Are we going to temporarily excuse the Bell riots not happening the first 4 days of September this year? We can talk about how prescient they were, but what's going to happen there? In the end, this may be the best answer, best excuse there is. But right now, it's not just timey-wimey, it's wibbly-wobbly. We don't have anything to ground anything to, and it's just a free-for-all turkey shoot. Whatever you want to have happen, whatever you need to have happen, just say, oh, temporal. It was a temporal incursion change. We need the big picture, but that may not be available for a while. And we may have ups and down times. The streaming, I don't think with the money attached to Star Trek that we should be 12 years without ongoing product. But humans can be really, humans and media and capitalism, as we saw last summer, cannot be exactly, as the Vulcans would say, logical about anything. And a moneymaker like Star Trek, assuming you're doing it right, would always be fulfilling the coffers of its corporate owners. It should be a win-win for both sides. And the more money they make will be if they put more care, attention, and put the right people making it. That should be a thing. But look, guys, this design argument and the put down, it's a false choice. It will get taken care of. It's going to go away. We've been there already. And some of us have been doing this canon smoothing and gap filling since, I don't know, a few decades now, as I say on Second Opinion. So let's take it easy on each other. Let's realize that people, if they didn't care, they wouldn't be here, and none of us would be here because no one would have cared about Star Trek. And that there are many appeals of the show. If visual canon wasn't part in continuity, wasn't part of Star Trek would be just out there with all the other franchises. And maybe it would be just as big. Maybe it would have the niche it has. Would it have been the spark plug for so much else back in the day? I don't know. But these are some dots that in this big picture fight, when it comes down to two people bashing each other in a comment thread, I want to go, look, guys, here are the shockwaves. Here's the implications. Here's the meta of what we should think about. And if you're upset about the choices made, I'm upset that no one looked at the beginning and said, the challenge is to do the 60s in a competitive, exciting, creative way now. You don't run away from it. That's your creative challenge. And you'll be so awesome if you can pull it off. And I'm not talking here most recently about the incredible recreation of the TNG bridge for season 3 in Picard. Dave and Liz and our whole amazing staff, all the Gold Star, Gold Era veterans working on it. That's getting the German helmets and the American white stars on the tanks, the Sherman tanks, correct. That's the basic. I'm talking about updating the Titan, updating the looks of the sets to be 20, 30 years later. I'm talking about those choices that had to be made. And some people, the carpet versus vinyl isn't going to go away. And this thing about updating the 60s to the 80s, look, all those shows shoot with the crane. I laugh. I critique all these bridges for being bus station bridges. They're huge. They're huge. Somebody walks from the captain's chair down to the front helm or to one of the back stations. It takes 5 minutes. I'm exaggerating, but it feels like it. It's not 2 steps down to a thing. They have to take several steps to get anywhere. Why? People have finally told me. They love with the cranes they can do and those drone type, scoopy shots. But those cranes take room and things have to be spaced out. That's a perfect example of that's bringing more storytelling power, but it's going to affect the actual physical layout of the bridge. So if someone actually did a picture perfect and Enterprise D level recreation back, but it had the Kirk, Sulu, Chekhov, outer ring, McCoy, Scotty, Spock, Uhura ring spread out a little more, if things were fudged, if there were more wild sections, that's the kind of thing I would say, okay. And that's what's reflected in the Enterprise bridges we wound up with. And you'll notice that the original debut of the Enterprise on Discovery is more out there. It was pulled back in so many ways for Strange New. So there's that. But it's all about what was the marching orders, what's the actual challenge delivered, thrown down. What's the goal? What's the mission statement? And that was not the height of priority at the time. Do I wish it was? Yes. The ship has sailed. We need to move on. We need to come up with the next level phase, which is quit arguing about the smooth heads and the bumpy heads and figure out the meta reason for all this. And it is not being weird and picayune and a waste of time and anal canonista background people that don't care about the wonderfulness of all the rest of Star Trek. It is Star Trek for them. And some people, you get my point. You get my point. We don't need to be fighting over it because it's all going to take care of itself. And some of the answers are going to percolate up from fandom itself. And some of it may be from licensees. And some of it may be from licensees, gaming, designs, magazines, publishing, who have fans who have bubbled up to add to that. That's where we are. That's where we are. And people who depend on Star Trek to be their rock in the middle of chaos, whether that's emotionally or just as a home in all the ways, because they take that stability as a sign of its future, that it's going to be around in a few years, that it's worth investing their time in. How many times have you been pissed that the show you got so into was canceled after a season or two? To the point now where you won't watch, my wife will not watch a show until it's been out. She thinks she's going to enjoy it. She won't watch it until there are 2 seasons out because she doesn't want to be ripped up at the end. And that sounds ridiculous until you remember how much big TV we've had recently. There are series sitting around on shelves that that a fraction of the audience has been able to see just because there was so much. So the last few years, it's a winning strategy. You want to protect your own emotional involvement. It's not about having your feelings hurt. It's about I invested that time in an increasingly crazy world where we have so many choices, especially if we're looking to what we get out of Star Trek that we've gotten out of here. So yes. If Star Trek, as the first And if not the biggest, the most long-lasting, for a reason. For still having uniqueness among a world where we are Comic-Con to death with so many IPs and franchises and media and formats. If that ultimately, it shouldn't go away, much less be denigrated. It is important. It deserves to be one of the 5 C's of Star Trek, as I say in one of my talks. And I'm talking about the C word, canon, or continuity, how you prefer. That is what made Star Trek, as much as the commentary, as much as the characters, as much as the casting. And if we look at the series over the years, different series, if one has been more or less popular or impactful, maybe it's because one of those C's suffered. And here's the last thing I want to say. This really hit home to me because I saw news of a poll. And okay, yes, yet another poll, la-di-da. Yes. And I'm just looking. So I filmed the news website, media, sci-fi fantasy genre. I filmed was citing a poll by SurveyMonkey. Now, SurveyMonkey is a survey, random thing, generic. People use it, right? SurveyMonkey ran a very generic poll. In fact, they even said 579. This is from February 22. It got on my radar. And the reason I cite to this is because I also saw recently, and still going, a Popverse poll that's open right now. You can get, if you went to Popverse and looked at Star Trek favorite or whatever, they're running a basic thing about what is your favorite series? Just bing, bing, bing. At the time an article was written about it, was 1,300 votes. It's now up to 4,770. There's no running total, unfortunately, but there was a news story written on their own site when the vote total was 1,300, or it's already more than tripled. And at the time, that poll with no numbers attached, that they just said in first place by a long shot, was DS9. And some of you say, well, yeah, it's the, I know. I'm just saying DS9, then Voyager. They don't say anybody else's ranking. They just mention that they are surprisingly ahead of TNG. Well, I don't know if that's a surprise anymore, but if there's a lot of gap, maybe. Everybody else is below that, talking about not only Prodigy and Lower Decks and Picard, and this is current, but the original series and Discovery. That's a current poll, and you can go vote over there. 2 years ago, February 2022, the SurveyMonkey poll was done. It was only 570. So part of this is the poll size, and where does the poll appear? Is the audience already skewed who sees the poll, right? Is it scientifically carried out with all the things that supposedly polls or the political and other marketing polls are done? No. So 2 years ago in this random poll, the original series was still on top with 34%. Then Next Generation, 19%, DS9 at 11%, Enterprise at 10%, Voyager at 8%, then Discovery at 7%, then Picard before season 3, Picard at 4%, Lower Decks at, Prodigy at 3.5%, and basically Lower Decks at barely 1%. So right there, only random 500. Really? Original series still in first? Then TNG, then DS9, then Enterprise, and then all that above Voyager with the Janeway's army that's come along, and Prodigy ahead of Lower Decks. And I'm not judging either shows. That does not compute with what I'm thinking. Now, Prodigy was early, Lower Decks was early. That was 2 years ago. That could account with it. And the new series all getting tiny numbers compared to the older ones. Part of what I'm saying about the emotion behind the reaction, and this is the last part of this puzzle, all these dots I'm trying to connect today in a long show, I know, is what I mentioned before. Time is passing. That means different people will have the keys, different people will be in charge of the franchise, different people will be in charge of bringing those to light as executive producers. There will be different production designers, different prop people, different visual effects people, and different writers in the writing room. The actors playing roles, that's the bottom rung of the ladder. the bare bones of the keel of these shows being laid down in the dry dock. That's where it all starts. And yeah, that's what Portal 47 is about. But go ahead, keep enjoying the cherry on top of your favorite actors doing your favorite roles so brilliantly. I guess that's allowed too. But I'm just saying, all of those initial points, the actors are like the last thing to come along in that process. And all of that will keep evolving and changing over time too. And just as only 10 years ago, these results would have been shocking. The original series forever over next gen, and people were still not respecting it. Took the revolution of Netflix and binging for DS9, and then that generation who were inspired by Kate Mulgrew and Voyager, that generation of women, and Seven, and B'Elanna, to grow up and mature and speak their truth and jump up for that. Time is everything. And if anything happens, back to our original enterprise design, if any of that noise finally goes away, I don't know if it will be because of any logic I've tried to bring to the situation today. It may just be because the original series generation finally leaves us. It's because the demographic wave, as these polls are kind of groping their way to, unscientific as they are, but it's happening. It's already happening with the original series giving way to even its partners at the time, DS9 and Voyager. If you've ever seen me live at a convention, I try to always, whether it's a solo panel or I'm even on a panel and we have time, we're not like crammed into 30 minutes, try to just get a handle, the sense of in the room. And of course, the room is a self-selected set. The room is fandom who got themselves to a convention and had the money to get there. Pay the tickets, pay the hotel, the travel, whatever, was out of town. And I talk about that when you're online. Online is not all fandom. Online are the people who are online that they can afford to spend some amount of time in a day here. Convention fandom, which used to be thought of as the hardcore, well, not always. There's a lot of opinion and emotion and representation of people who never get to show up at a convention, or people who would love to be online all day or half a day or even an hour or two a day who can't be. So everything has to be looked at through those filters. But one thing we know is the clock is ticking. And despite the people like the young entrepreneur that I found at Star Trek San Francisco, you find her on my channel, who's making Etsy buttons and earrings and things, who says, after watching everything from her fandom parents, but totally on her own decision-making, the original series is her favorite, and she's 11 because it's about the stories and the characters and not about action and sci-fi visual effects. She sounds like the brochure for the most beginners of the excesses of the current age. She sounds like the brochure for the biggest original series, board out there. But that was her take. So who knows? Who knows what will happen as the years go by? But the basic demo curve is going to be so that maybe the debate over this whole issue of what to do about the convergent looks, maybe it only becomes the realm of the purist, and the folks who actually grew up with that bridge and that look eventually leave us. And just the pure numbers of things don't notice it so much. And maybe it becomes not a hot issue. Again, only over the purists and the historians and the academics and the people who watched and fought for a third season and the people who made the syndication numbers explode, not because they were on a mission or a quest, but because that's what they wanted to do with their life because Star Trek was so awesome. And still 10 years later, nothing like anything on TV, watching after school or at the dinner time news hour. They'll all be gone finally. And just as we said goodbye to John Trimble recently, that whole generation, and remembering what an impact and why Star Trek was like God-smackingly different, even though now we've got 27 different Star Treks. So I want to thank everybody who's been sounding off at Second Opinion, at all my threads, anybody who is in the people who are in the comment sections now online. We have something we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. We had to subscribe to a magazine to have interaction. We had to subscribe to Interstat to have the high-end Star Trek fandom opinion making going back and forth, even if that got nasty and a little anal and a little precious at times. But we have this thing now, and it's not even the message boards of the 80s and 90s where people could get all personal. I mean, it's pretty out in the open and public, and the mundane world can kind of intrude when they want to. And yeah, bots and trolls can skew results and inflame passions just to see us divided. But have your opinions. Be sincere, but be respectful. Be aware that you may be being played at times by third parties who want nothing to do with but the discussion, the debate, the critiquing, that's always been there. We've always had that. We just have new means to get at it. And I think we're having a swing back toward the importance of local clubs, or at least the away meets, the meetups for discussions. Those are all we've gone back to enjoying our live meetups and people. And it may not just be you and your 4 best buds at a bar having your debates. It may be a lot, a nice. I've never met any hateful, toxic tubers. I know they've been at cons, but I've never come across anyone in my face who would have your opinion and disagree with me. But the virulent, horrible excess that exhausts people online never seems to turn up live. Fancy that. But here we are, in an episode that was all about unmasking the Breen and advancing the plot in a really interesting way with these two couples. The more I thought about it, the old bugaboo of fighting over the Enterprise, which made me sad in the beginning. But I'm a realist, and unless you want to go torpedo the franchise and burn it all down, you move on. And when you move on, those smooth heads and bumpy heads might give you fodder for a whole range of amazing other stories. We may get there, and it may take a while to get nailed down to where it doesn't seem like just a poor excuse to cover up your undisciplined story urges. But we'll eventually get there. I'm not exactly sure how and why, but I know I've been amazed at the things we worried about in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And we'll get there. We'll get there. But whatever we do, let's be civil. And my TTLers, I know you're the civil types. If you're watching me later on YouTube, please sound off. Please tell me exactly what you're thinking and what you're feeling. But just do it in a respectful way. Can you please? Absolute adjectives that just crush all semblance of leaving a little room of doubt at the end, a little uncertainty. Maybe you're 90% sure, but there's still 10% could be a wobble. Those adjectives and adverbs that just supremely, this is the way, they kind of tend to discourage discussion. And is that really what you want? Especially if you're feeling frustrated at what you just saw on screen and you know that it's out there forever until somebody sometime down the line says, well, when Janice Lester said the world of women isn't involved in your world of starship captains, somebody down the line says, you know what? She was not a well person. Was she speaking for the entire history and sociology wing of the Federation when she made that sentence? Or was she just an aggrieved, not well, little jealous, rejected girlfriend? And whatever it is, whether it's blinky lights or Canon like that, texture not trivia gang. Okay, I knew this was if I'm gonna go there, I wanted to say all of that. But the other thing I wanted to say too, and I should have done this at the first, was I wanted to say 2 happy birthdays today. Am I frozen? Hello? Am I frozen here? I don't think so. Oh no, someone tell me if I'm frozen. Have we? Yeah, I'm going to try this and we'll see what happens. Yeah, the audio is still coming through. Mike, you're saying not frozen. Frozen, let it go. I'm going to try this. Shoot. Okay, I'm going to finish up this program just to say happy birthday in memory to Charlie Washburn, who was the first Black assistant director in Hollywood that I got to know near the end of his life and have written about. And most of all, happy birthday to Ralph Sinensky, who's an amazing 101 today. There is a card you can sign that is, he's 101 tomorrow, and I think, but the card is still up. If you go to grouptogether.com, just look for Ralph Sinensky. You can get on and sign it and leave a message for him. There's a group that has that going. Grouptogether.com and look up Ralph Sinensky. Yeah. Let's shake the camera up here for a minute. Are we there? Okay, there. Now I'll go back to, that's interesting. Turn it on and off, right? Will eyeglasses let me come back? And it, okay. Well, we'll just finish up like this then. That's interesting. I wonder if maybe I wore out my, we'll come back to here and I will do this. Gang, I think we're back. Yay? Yes. We'll switch cameras and I'll end up with the junkier ends for this. Just to say, happy birthday, Ralph. 101, what an amazing treasure. There, I ignored. Camera battery ran low. This has been a long one today, but I wanted to connect all these dots in one place at one time. I hope I kept everybody. I hope I didn't lose anyone. But I just wanted to cover all that ground together. And I should have said happy birthday to Charlie and happy birthday to Ralph Sinensky. Again, it's grouptogether.com. In fact, you know what? I had this, now that we're over the camera crisis, I'm going to put it in here myself. In the chat is the place you can go and send a happy 101st birthday to Ralph Sinensky. I haven't talked to him in the last year, but he was doing interviews and recordings up until the last few months at least. I had a long sit down with him on camera, and we used audio on the Trek Files for 6 or 8 different episodes. I know Scott Mantz, the podcast that he did going through all the original series, had Ralph on in great detail per episode. But the saga of how he was unfairly fired from Tholian Webb, all tied up with the Paramount buyout, instead of just being a random historical event, more and more the implications of Paramount's buying Desilu and what changed immediately. And it wasn't, they tightened up the budgets. There was a lot going on. And a lot of the reasons why things were shifting so fast with third season had to do with that now we can overlay the Paramount buy-up of Desilu and go, okay. There we go. There you go. Okay. We are going to end it there for our micro break. I'm just going to say, if you stayed with me on YouTube, thanks for everybody live who's here. And if you're still here with this YouTube later, boy, I really, really, really want to hear from you in the comments. This could potentially be a comment thread that outdoes the live show. We'll probably take a low end on the comments here as we get to chat. But if you're watching us on YouTube only, appreciate you jumping by. If you made it this far, I hope I gave you lots of fodder to comment on. So please get your thoughts together. And please remember that we're here thanks to our TTLers. Would you do that for me, please? Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Josh Patton, Justin Porteous, Glinda Bruton, Chris Jiggins. I'm sorry, I was going to the Bahamas for a second there. Pranakasha Productions, Comedy Forecast, Andrew Grzymski. Boy, this camera thing just threw me. That was amazing. Robert McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Pohl, Hubbard Gunnjonson, Alan Hohensey, Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Donna S. Runyon, Greg Wickstrom, and Casey Shufsky. And again, if you want, won't always be an hour and a half, kids, but patreon.com/Trekland Live, $5, $10 every month. It's a very simple Patreon. I appreciate your support. I always talk about the Trek Files as a reminder. We're on hiatus, but there's 11 seasons, 24 episodes a season sitting there at our page, Facebook, or you can go to Roddenberry podcast.roddenberry.com or any places you get your podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Apple, yada, yada. The documents, the files, the actual files are only at our Facebook page, though, Facebook/The Trek Files. Thank you so much. And again, if it's getting to the word summer and you're getting the itch to come to LA and you want to, yeah, sure, you can go to Vasquez Rocks on your own. But I would urge you to hit me up and see if we can fix you up your own custom 4 sites day tour on your own Trekland Treks. Love to talk to you about it and work that out, you and your group. And of course, it's Larry Nemechek on Twitter X. It's Larry's Trekland for where you are. Like and subscribe. Please share this. Instagram and Facebook, and portal47.net for your backstage mini-con all year long. A lot of the ideas, not just the backstage's creators, but we try to keep up with the business news. We try to keep up with the meta of Star Trek. By the time it gets to the screen that you enjoy, what affected that and what is often not talked about. It's changed a lot since this is our 8th year, coming up to our 8th year. Things have altered a lot. But no, I'm sorry, our 9th year. We've come a long way talking about some of these beyond just what was the last popular actor said in his Twitter. We've come a long way toward exploring Star Trek, the Trek that reaches you and why, and how it was done in the past and why. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that so much. Keeps me fresh. Our community keeps me fresh. And like right now. If you're leaving us here on YouTube, please, everybody, just till next time, would you? Do all the things, stay healthy, and check your sources, stay woke, interesting times, and trek well. Okay. I knew I might be biting off more than I should be chewing, but maybe we'll keep this chat schedule a little shorter than normal. But good to see everybody. Thank you there. I'm curious how many of you came in at the beginning and made it through the end. This is a Wednesday. It's a different day. And now I'm going to see if, yes, I do. And now I can come. Oh, nope. It's not going to give it to me. So that's fine. That's fine. Good to see how many people made it through the end of the day. How many of you made it to Wednesday? Portal 47 Ask Dr. Trek roundtables tonight. All the P47ers who are stateside here. Yeah, TWL, obviously. I would do that more often, but I'm thinking of the long term for YouTube. Okay. I don't think we we don't need that. Here, this one. Oh, Glenn, I'm sorry we missed you there. But Diana, hey. Wow. Folks, yeah, I've since blocked our original little spammer there. Hey, Sean, an actual question. And remember, we're super chat, everybody. Can I ask you about the set used for masks and Blood Oath? Was that a redress of the Klingon Hall or a new set? This is driving me crazy. Okay, talking about TNG's masks, Into the Run, Blood Oath. Talking about the interior. The only Blood Oath interior was that stairwell coming down to kind of a thing. Masks, I think, was reusing some bits and pieces. The end of TNG, they were reusing that village square. So the Native American planet, where the Indians were relocated, was the same reuse as, and the Cardassians had the phaser fight. And this is totally off the top of my head. It's in the companion. I talk about this in the companion, and Richard James was good enough to share about this. But they were reusing big sets and saving money, and stockpiling money to put back toward all good things. But the Klingon colony with where they recreate where Alexander is grown to an adult in a weird situation. It starts off with Worf and Alexander visiting the festival. That was a reuse of the same set they used, and that may have been part of Masks too in that batch of episodes. I think Blood Oath, I don't think so much. I think that was just an entryway with a stair, and it was shot very fast with fighters in front of it. So yeah, Christoph, I'm thinking I must really be on the radar, huh? The new Breen look like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Okay. Hey, Stephen. May 25th, we're celebrating Lord. Yes, I'm going to start promoting this. I just didn't have it in time to get it rigged up for today. I'm going to have this on my socials. This is amazing. A Lower Decks mass marathon to spin the meter, as I say. Awesome. Awesome project. All hands on decks. Very good. Great hashtag. Hello, Carlos. Sa. Yeah, this was a thing. I noticed this right off. Talk about the Breen snouty helmets. They took the snouts away, but even in the day, the first time that premiered was I'm trying to remember the episode title, but it was Dukat and Kira chasing down his mistress and the kid, and it wound up just being his daughter out on the gravel pit location. And that was the first time we saw a Breen. I'm going to talk about this maybe on Second Opinion, but the Breen used to be Brandon's big joke. They were supposed to be the big bad race that we never saw. They were only mentioned. And the first time they were mentioned was, I want to say, the episode with Timothy, the kid that emulated, who was the orphan, who'd been through the trauma of seeing his folks and the crew of his little ship killed and raided and boarded. And he blamed himself, and he covered. Anyway, they're talking about the disruptor fire was either Romulan, somebody else, or Breen, and it was the first time they'd ever been mentioned. And then the Breen just got mentioned as a one-off thing that they kept talking about, but you never saw. And that was the joke until finally DS9 started to show us the Breen. Breen first at the Dominion prisoner camp that was down by the bench. Never turn your back on a Breen. Cold as Breen. And the reason that they uniforms, people said this looks like Star Wars, and there was a whole disuse for 2 or 3 years about not bringing Breen back after they finally appeared because of that lookalike. People thought, did you just rip this off from Star Wars? And Bob Blackman was kind of disappointed, so they just didn't. And then they said, okay, we're going to embrace this. And then the Dominion War, you saw them a lot. Oh, on Towel Day. That's funny. So you're thinking Discovery still using the dark sets like DS9? Yeah. They didn't improve the exception of the mirror universe. It's kind of the way they are. Okay, what are you saying here? Hey, Timothy. Okay. Oh, this is about yes, totally. I have this in, well, it's not my book. I have it in some of the interviews that I did, some of the work I did for DS9 at the time. Not in a book, but in articles and things we did back in the day. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Sydney. Thank you, Mike. Yes, I would say so. Bounce of Terror, Doomsday Machine, Space Seed, 1 hour episodes. Oh, Doomsday Machine. Oh my God. Yeah, I'd bounce a pair too, but Doomsday Machine. Oh. They had respect for what came before Saturday lacking. I don't think it's about respect. I just think it was priorities and not being aware. Again, it's the mix of people. And we can talk about this till the cows come home, but does it alter and change in the future? Maybe not so much. But what does the next step or two down the line do about it? And that's where the official corporate retconning takes place. Timothy, you've never actually seen Star Wars? Well, I have. Money talks as much as concerted vocal fandom. That's true, but concerted vocal fandom, if sustained and if the numbers are there, and if it's intelligently done, if it's just a mass mob of torches and pitchforks, no. That marketing campaign that tried to say you will lose X amount of dollars in ticket sales and merchandise, etc., if you kill off Spock, did look legitimate. It was done by professional marketers. Oh, don't worry, Rocky. When you got in, I'm sure there was plenty more to go. Well, John, there is this. Again, I'm not talking about the filmmaking, the cinematography. I'm talking about the lines. That's all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the materials. I'm talking about the lines that you can plausibly say was historically the same. Because part of it was people didn't see Star Trek in the future as future history the way we would look at World War II designs as past history. They just didn't see it the same. And that's what I was trying to get to. It's future history that has not been played with. If no one had respected it before now, but it had always managed to be maintained within reason and tweaked at times. Okay, well, thank you for letting us know. 139,000 followers. Yes. Production fatigue in 2005. Yes. And I will say there was far more production fatigue, producer fatigue, than there was audience fatigue. They loved to, Rick used to say, oh, I think we've got audience fatigue. I want to take a year or two off. No, it was as much as they tried to take a break and a reset, and I was there. And some people were let go to get fresh blood in. And everybody had to just was talking to Mike Westmore about how he started doing, they wanted to keep him, but they wanted to find ways to help him refresh and break, the ruts. Exactly. I think, Sean, you'll wind up with plenty more here to do. I'm going to try to get through. They finally, I said for years they needed to have series or they wouldn't be fleshing out the Star Wars universe. They finally got that. And then animateds, but animateds are so dismissed. Animateds and CGI'd animated ones too. Oh, Adam, not as late as I wound up going. Look at this. Look at this. Yeah, Rockio yes. So jump in on the hashtag campaign and the rewatch campaign. Get the meters going. It's a visual. It's a watch it. It's a all hands on deck, literally hashtag. When it came strong out of the gate, the question was, what was it being strong about? And what was it? Yeah. Oh, it definitely had money spent on it, and promotional budget put behind it. Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, and DS9 season 1 suffered from spending so much on an awesome pilot that they cut back on all the rest, which is why Michael wanted to start season 2 off with the trilogy. The Circle, the Siege, the Circle, and the Little Red Hen. No. And yeah, Timothy, this too, which is what we joke about being the template for most of the exactly TNG and Voyager. Some would argue Voyager never quite took off, but there we go. Well, it took off with 7. Well, it's a period piece for the period it's supposed to be in. My point was, as I said, the challenge was to take the 60s and update it. But keep it plausibly where something would, again, the trick of I'm closer to this now, I see more detail, or you have 10% 20%, do what they did to the bridge in Inner Mirror Darkly. Change the visuals, tweaks, make big tweaks, not wholesale changes. And still, things like dimensional relationships had to be changed to accommodate the tech of the time. So I realize it's that. Nobody's trying to stick their head. I just know that had a different design, had the design imperative goal been handed to the design staff differently, we could have not only have had a lot more pleasing product in the end, but we could have had a lot less rancor at a time of chaos at the beginning. Because a lot of people with legitimate critiques were lumped in with the bots and trolls and the people who were upset about streaming and upset about paying for Star Trek and all of that. It all became one big, long, raw nerve. And again, to me, cinematography is different than design. Kelvin at least kept the white bridge. The white bridge? Well, what you're talking about here is basically what they did for the Titan, right? It was the Stargazer, and then what they redid for the Titan. Everything they even had vinyl floors, no carpet. And again, John, that's not what I said. You take the design and now run and do it with your materials and your technology and your animation lighting abilities. The same as now, if you did Armus and the Tar Baby, you wouldn't have a guy in a suit that was disintegrating all day long. You would have CG. Well, okay, Rocky, you're one of the ones that go with this. And you can do that. Everybody can carry around your own canon, but it doesn't do the franchise any good. The greater continuity is going to be maintained. You can't fracture Star Trek and have it be in a million pieces. And this is true. The last season of Enterprise was digital and didn't need lab film and daily tapes and just so much saved. And that's cool, Carl. Can't talk today. Carl, that's great. And again, everybody's different. I'm not telling anybody else what to do. I'm just saying, number one, let's all respect each other. And number two, this whole divide didn't have to happen. Or it didn't have to happen but it did happen. And now we're going to deal with it. And somebody further in the future may deal with it in a better way than we could even think about now. A different leadership team coming from a different place, different set of culture, different set of technological tools. That's why nothing is worth getting all beat up and depressed about now beyond just a normal discussion. That's all I'm trying to say. And some people may be, this is how you do it. Like I said, I came up with my thing as I want to say, if this is where we're going to go, then the original series was the anomaly and everything else was true prime. And it's the anomaly because it was the filmed adventures of Captain Kirk and his crew. It was the Zorro. It was the Captain Video. Well, weirder things. It's the kind of thing, if I had 40 or 50 years future hindsight to look back on, we would see. Well, hey, Wanda, there you go. And see, yes, I'm overdue to do a Discovery rewatch and see, now that we've been through what we've been through, I never want to lose my first reaction to it or anything. I never want to lose track of my first initial thoughts. But we all are older. Times do change. Other things temper. Fifth moon of Jupiter. Yeah, that's what the giant poster book article by Jeff and Doug said in 1977, that the reason we don't have dilithium because it doesn't naturally occur on Earth, but as we mine the solar system, we'll discover it and then find this use for it. The thing is, the definition of the fifth moon of Jupiter, I thought it used to be Io. But anyway, David, I think we've talked about this. Dr. Dave Williams, everybody, exploring the solar system through Arizona State's tie-in with NASA, the planetary exploration systems. Well, Scott, I'm very happy for you. And you have the luxury of coming to Star Trek when you did and finding out about it when you did and the way you did. Okay. Oh, the writing creativity is the easiest thing to, well, mostly the easy thing to explain. The other thing that's interesting, and I meant to say this in the harangue, was that the people, the not the toxic tubers, but the bashers, whether they're actual trolls or they're just really, really upset, angry fans, the whole disco sucks thing. I just want to go, have you seen bad TV? Star Trek is very blessed. We don't, there are clinker episodes out there. We love to make fun of them. And I don't even mean just Shades of Grey, Aquael. But the worst Star Trek is nowhere near the worst of any other franchise. And a lot of times it's a would-be franchise that never got off the ground because it was too incoherent. I'm just saying, these people that jump up and say like whatever, disco sucks, like it's the worst thing ever to grace a screen. No. No. Thank you, Rocky O. Choosy mothers choose gifts. Yeah. Yep. This is what I mean, Christoph. And obviously, real police call boxes in London all look differently now. So this must be a period piece. It's a temporal line that began. What did Doctor Who land in? It got stuck. Isn't that the thing? The TARDIS got stuck at that one moment in 1960. Well, it was 63. It first aired the weekend that Kennedy was shot. But police call boxes looked differently earlier because of the technology, and they look different now. Do they even have call boxes in the era of digital phones? But the TARDIS will forever be rooted in 1963, despite what happened before or since. But that's the DNA, that's the canon of the show. That's the format of the show. Exactly, Carl. I can enjoy it. I'm not knocking any other franchise in IP. I'm just saying that's their nature, and it was never Star Trek's nature. That's what made Star Trek unique. They didn't recast. We're recasting now Kirk, Spock, McCoy because they're finding reasons to have those. We had an alternate universe, and now we're catching up with Strange New Worlds, and that's fine. It's not my first choice. I would rather go where no one has trekked before, rather than go revamp the magic words Kirk and Spock. I feel like there was plenty of magic before. I just wish we had more guts to go into different places, and more guts to go talk about lots of things that we wonder about. Why did I do that? So much potential to go. No, Scott, I don't want to go to a museum and pull in, or go to I don't want to go to Ticonderoga and pull in the plywood Christmas light sets that were built exactly like. I'm talking about design. I'm not talking about construction when I also say cinematography. There's ways. That's the challenge. If you're so smart and brilliant, that's the challenge handed down to these wonderfully creative designers. That's the challenge they would have. And of course, they would bring all the newest technologies and surfaces and materials and lighting animation. That's the creative challenge to it. And of course, things have to be squiggled a little bit differently. It's just when it was such an extreme break. And I say that could have been done. That would have been amazing. And you 2017 it, or you 2022 it the hell out of it that way. And then you darken it, show it in shadow, and you tilt, and you have quick cuts, and yada yada. And your consoles are probably further apart to accommodate modern filming. That's probably a given. It's just the extreme differences that are hard to swallow. Unless we just saw a simplified version in the 60s, because that's what it was. Well, but in 79 they came up with the refit. Don't be so quick to be don't be so arrogantly new, John. 79, it was all about a refit. They totally had a canon explanation, just the same way that Terry and Dave anticipated things that they knew fans would talk about, because they were fans themselves, and they had backstopped the reasons for things. Very few criticisms raised in season 3, visually and conceptually, got past them. And in 79, it was all about the refit. It was pre explained. Yes, exactly. Well, obviously, it wasn't set in stone because they didn't go back to 2266. They said we are moving forward in time, and Next Gen was set 80 years in the future, and that was the caveat for why it was the way it was. That's what I mean. They continued the thing of respecting the intelligence of the audience. And very true. Lower Decks has amazed me with what they do, conceptually and visually both. Now, Christoph, I thought the world had embraced the 80. I taped that VHS tape, and then I never watched it, and I was going to watch it, and then Who fans said, oh, just throw it away. It's just trash. Well, now the Who fandom, the Who franchise has embraced it. He's even numbered, right? Oh, Scott, you're just a low bar. And again, I say, the more the years go by, the more young people like you won't care. You youngin'. There is no plot armor in the Strange New Worlds cliffhanger. I know. The worst thing about that is the fact that it's not 3 months later. It's like a year and a half later. It'll take to get to that. And Timothy, you're jumping in for me. Did I miss this whole conversation for being so far behind? Yeah, timey-wimey has totally expanded beyond Who fandom. Absolutely. Hi, Don. Good to see you. It's SpongeBob SquarePants Day. Alrighty then. On this Wednesday. Well, here we go, Melanie. You should read. There's 2 or 3 economics books out now. This is one of the things that is still out there floating around. We're all still madly trying to get our arms around it, and people talk about it, and there's theories out there. And my friend Manu has his book Trekonomics, and other people have taken shots at this too. And the whole thing about, is Picard really an elitist running his vineyard there? Again, it's like when Raffi talked about, you sit there and you're fine. Yeah, it made him sound horrible. And she's in her trailer. It was the best trailer with the best 24th century internet I ever saw. That's what she wanted. We did a Trekland Tuesdays live one time because can you force feed utopia? And Starfleet provided for Raffi while she was in not a good mental health state. And Picard actually helped bring her out of that crash. But the vineyard in France, I'm saying, is like Cisco's restaurant in New Orleans. It's historical. It's like the Williamsburg of the times. And people can all live how they want to live. When you've got matter replication to the point where it was, and travel is what it was, it's a fascinating question. The whole thing of the economics and labor and what does Picard say? We better ourselves and the rest of humanity by exploring ourselves and exploring the out there. But not everybody's on a starship going places. Apparently, not everybody is being minions mining like the synths and yeah. Donnie, thank you for that. I would love to go back and change the circumstances of things now, especially the first one. But I was doing stellar cartography at the same time, and I was just a little wiped out. May the first day for Stephen First. There you go. Okay, thank you for repping others. Stop motion Star Trek series. I thought we had one already. Robot Chicken. Well, yeah. Sure. Carl, start your list. You can add it to everybody else's list of what is not out there. Oh, Star Trek Lego movie. Interesting. Thanks for sharing us your list there. And of course, they all have their different appeals. Well, I did too, Diana. But Christoph. Yeah, we'll see if the temporal incursion wave has rippled the Bell riots back a little later. But I think people are. Oh, by the way, as we have unlocked boxes and got things out, guess what? I'm going to be ready. I'll show you guys first. See, I survived the Bell riots. Sanctuary District A, September 4th of 2024. It was DS9 Crew Cup mug. Yay. This is so awesome. I'd forgotten. It was in a box. In a box. Yeah, the 2 words are post-scarcity. Exactly. Maybe the Vulcans show up and stop World War III, just like Pike showed up in the Strange New Pilot. See, the basic thing is now we're just untethered. That's the only thing I don't like about right now. I hope there is a determined effort to nail this down. And some of you are saying, "Oh, there, yes, everything." Yes, I do. That's why I'm in Star Trek fandom. That's why I'm here. That's why we do stellar cartography. That's what we do. And if it's not your part, then that's fine for you. But that's me. And I used to think I was alone. And now I know I'm not. And I didn't need to not be alone. It just was a happy coincidence. I was going to, if it really was me and 8 other people in the whole country that cared, I was still going to do it anyway. Because that's where Star Trek burned my butt. Hey, Mark. Glad you could show up. Thank you, Christoph, for trying to jump in on this. 25 words or less. And there you go. That's it. And I know, David, since then, there have been 1 or 2 other books that some people have enjoyed better than Manu's, but that was a first stab. No, Timothy, and we're not going to talk about it except that it exists, and we are not going to spoil it. So don't get that idea. For those of you here with us last week. Oh, really? Despite the things you love about Disney and Paramount, NBC Universal is still your #1 media company on earth? Well, dun, dun, dun. Maybe Scotty or McCoy will ask Pike to paint the Enterprise bridge white using some technical or medical reason. And you're not talking about the first Enterprise A bridge either, are you? You know, William, there was a manga comic on paper, a few Star Trek books, right after the big cancellation in the corporate, like in 06, 07, 08. One of the things that was really experimental was Star Trek manga. I had a book. I may have gotten rid of it since then, but I have at least one of those. Wow, 10 more days till 20 years of NBC Universal. Yeah, Coyote versus Acme. Visual effects supervisor for First Contact. We're talking about John Knoll or somebody else. I've forgotten who was on Acme. Timothy, no, in the States, we're not doing spoilers. Thank you for asking up front, though. We had an incident where people didn't ask up front. We know it exists, but we're not getting into story details. But if you can find a French fan here, I'd love to know about it. And there you go, Josh. This is my point. Change is hard. We do assimilate it. And you know what? Nothing is always perfect. The rough edges of Star Trek over time do get smoothed out. And they even get retconned, or as I said, we used to say, canon smoothed. Look, they were the writers who wound up with Discovery at the end of season 1 already knew that the long distance smart video comms and the touchscreens didn't make any sense, and they were already madly trying to do it. But 2 things: A, the money had been spent, the sets were built, they weren't going to do that. The answers they provided were all going to be cheap, verbal only, so they can have Pike say, we're ripping out the holocomms. They didn't ever get back around to the touchscreens, but there you go. My answer was they just caused cancer and they were taken out at some future refit, because we still had 8 years to go at that point. They should use the Guardian time gate. Oh, Willie, that's so on the nose. This is a thing too, Josh. And hey, everybody, Josh Patton is one of the Star Trek reporters out there actively writing, making his pennies, actually doing this professionally. This is what I said. This is why I was excited for Prodigy to be on, Nickelodeon at first, and now on Netflix. And even though those are pay channels, they're not a minority streamer like Paramount Plus. Why don't I do this and get you over here? Oh, sorry guys, I missed my. Oh my God, we've got tons to get through here before Frozen. It was a camera. Yeah, I died from my camera dying. And we've gone so long that I just reset and missed some chat, so I'm apologizing right up front right now. But Carl, this is where my chat got to. So if you were before this, re-ask your question. But yes, I think in-person fandom and meetups, clubs and meetup groups, the away team format, I think it's all having a resurgent right now. Part of it is driven by wanting to rebound against the pandemic shutdowns, but Mike, I lost the setup for this, and I will forever wonder what the intro line for this was. And at least I know about the freezing. There was a very rational explanation for it. Yes. It was all purely just my camera running out of battery, and I didn't catch the alerts. No, everything is not 100% better, Scott. It's junky around the edges. This is, just to refresh, this is the address for the happy birthday card for Ralph Sinensky on his 101st. So I may have chunked out a lot of the chat, gang. Sorry about that. And happy birthday, Melanie, if I didn't say it before. Yes. Hey, Crusher. I wonder what story you're talking about, but there we go. But good to see you. Yeah, we're running longer and later. And Glenn, you full circled around. Yay, there we go. There we go. You're very welcome. Thank you for amplifying the Trekland message too there, Crusher. Are we here? We here. Hi, Project Achieve. Fresh, new to us on Tuesdays live, on Wednesday. Glad to have you, and get in touch with me anytime. Mm-hmm. I think I mercifully lost chat in the middle there. Great. Okay. Sounds like I know you by another name somewhere else. But there we go. Can always count on you, Glenn. The breen on screen stay mainly in the green. Yes, thank you. Hero worship. Yes, little Timothy. It drove me up the wall. They'd all say Timothy, like Tim. Just his name is Tim. Oh, well, thank you for your service, Josh. I didn't realize that. Maybe you'd mentioned it. Best series about War on Terror is still Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Not Enterprise Season 3, huh? Okay. Oh, maybe you found the manga book that I was talking about from 06, 07, 08, somewhere in there. Well, Glenn, this is what I say, and probably many other tweaks that could be modernizing on it. But just the lines, just the dimensions and the lines and the planes, and then go to town with materials and surfaces and control interfaces. And didn't have to have, homemade plastic used pulled out of ice cube trays for the buttons. Oh, that's right. See, I've already tried to block it from my mind with the subway tunnel behind the consoles. You could walk behind the consoles, which I think they took from Franz Joseph trying to retcon access, but they took their access corridor and made it like, oh, let's take a stroll back here. Kyle. Okay, you're gonna go here, huh? Recast it just like all the other legacy characters. Okay. Well, I guess we'll just, recast Air Force One or something, or recast Old Ironsides. I guess we can do that too. There's a limit to this whole it's a character. Just saw Disco for the first time in season 5 and loved it. Well, Crusher, you lost a lot of drama along the way. And I think this is pretty true. But can somebody just appreciate the fact that I came at this whole wad from about 7 different angles, interrelated pieces? Okay. I said my personal thing, and then I said here's the reality, and then I said, and it may not be settled for 20 years, and here's historical precedent, and let's at least all just move forward because the ship has sailed. Did I just not say that? Just because you accept something, you can accept the fact that, well, I guess we still do this. You can accept the fact that George Bush W served 2 terms, knowing that the Florida vote count was never finished. The Supreme Court stopped the recount, and we never knew exactly who won Florida. But the decision was made, and short of a Civil War rebellion over it, the Brooks Brothers rebellion notwithstanding, we moved ahead to our detriment. But you can talk about the 2000 election without talking about wanting to undo it and redo it. That's gone. And that's what's different about these days. And that is why I love hearing your opinion and everybody else's. Fresh takes. And the times, how the times you're in change the perspective of somebody's first versus the time that it was in first. Hey, Christian, glad you could be here too. What's the latest buzz on Star Trek The Academy? Star Trek Academy, STA is happening. It's going to be, it was always meant to debut in 2025. The strikes pushed it back further, but they had more buffer time to make up. It's 23rd century. I am sure it's not announced publicly, or it has, but I am sure, especially with the talking about Academy and even Michael Burnham being a guest instructor in the future. Like, come on, hit me over the head with that one. Oh, I think I just spoke out of temporal time, but it's okay. No big deal, gang. We're just going to move right along. You met 3 casts from the time tunnel. Wasn't there just one series? Cool, Dave. See, those pairings like that are kind of interesting. A lot of people have done podcasts and video shows where that's the fan and the unaware. Mm-hmm. Gonna lump in the Orville and Galaxy Quest. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how that's just not enough, is it? Huh? Yeah, but they're madly working on it. Yes. And you know that I've just gone blank on it. Noga's the head writer. Tawny Newsome is in the room, and one of the other writers from a show from Discovery is in the writers' room on Academy. One of the women writers on the show is in the Academy room, I think. But one of the writers from Disco that are now jobless went over to Academy. See, this is the thing. It's your own little time temporal anomaly there, Josh. Yeah, the freshness versus the original, what you knew from the fan. Yeah. Yes, it was the pilot for a U.S. series. They wanted to produce Who because they thought Who was tired in the U.K. and it wouldn't. And America was the solution, and it was co-produced with Fox. It was on Fox TV, Fox Network TV. The one. It was a pilot. It wasn't a movie at all. Movie. And then here you go. To me, it's almost like I don't know exactly, but my first take is the Peter Cushing Doctor Who was a little bit like the Kelvin movies, where it sprang from at a time. They should do something, but we don't exactly know what. And here's our best guess. There was no overriding mission and vision going on. It was to get you somewhere else. It was to get JJ a Star Wars contract. Oh, really? Your brother started with Star Wars, came to Trek. There you go. Boo, boo, boo. You want that mug? Sorry, this one's mine. Now, if I could replicate that, if I could 3D print it, that would be pretty awesome. Let me see. I'm going to bring this down a little just for the heck of it there. Well, yeah, if you're going to start pulling out threads, the further we go into real history and starting to get all those decades ahead of time when they would post date something to be in the future, but not the far future. Everything. Yes, exactly. Because First Contact is and Zephram Cochrane is around for Archer's dad to have worked with him, right? So, yeah. And then we're into the Romulan War dates, and yeah, exactly. At what point do the ripple effects of or somebody may just say, you know what, everything's on the table. We're just going to tell stories, and there will never be a pin down. And again, Star Trek will lose part of its charm if there's no plan to it. If it's just a willy-nilly thing, if it just goes Doctor Who and says, look, just focus on this set and these three characters and everything else just comes your way. Well, okay, you can do that. It's a fundamental change in the nature of the franchise. I will be dead and gone and don't care. Nobody will not care that I didn't care. Okay, chat. Well, Melanie, you just have the misfortune of being around long enough to have seen when it weren't so. And yeah, DirecTV. Star Trek soap opera. Well, some would say that all of this is the Star Trek soap opera. This is I hadn't thought about this, Christoph, this angle, but there's probably writing out there, I guess, about it. But this, again, it's another outcome of the shattered streaming market, as if the streaming market was ever this grand construction that the streamers held it out to be in the beginning. Netflix pioneered this accidentally, and then Prime jumped in from its own unique angle of having a freight delivery company, and everybody else has just been, the old brick and mortars trying to jump over. Aside from Hulu, which was originally put together by the networks to be a pooled. Anyway, the mistake people made was after only 5, 6, 7, 8 years that this all became like, oh, it's the Bible and it's all set in stone, and it was not. The emperor had no clothes about this whole business model. Yeah, season 3 Enterprise was the darkest Trek ever, maybe, aside from bits of DS9 Dominion War, Pale Moonlight, and yes. Hey, Chuck. If the Enterprise was a character, they replaced Cary Grant with Hugh Grant. Younger and flashier, but not as classic. Okay. Oh, the first election. Yeah, we were in Europe when 2000 happened, and all the Europeans were like, what are you doing? You have no president. I said, yes, we do. It's Bill Clinton. He will be president for 3 more months, and we will figure this out. Absolutely. And we thought that was unprecedented. Actually, it wasn't. They had the 1877 whip. Suddenly people were like, what? There was history between the Civil War and World War I? Or even the Spanish-American War? The 30 years nobody wanted to talk about because of now reasons? Yeah. Oh, Reconstruction's so boring. We just skip right over that. What was supposed to happen and then didn't? And if Lincoln had not been killed, what would have? Yeah. You want to do let's quit fixing Pearl Harbor and the JFK assassination. Let's do some what ifs about the Lincoln assassination. Would the Freedmen's Bureau have really worked, and the federal troops have really tried to force some cultural evolution faster? Interesting. Or would it just provoked armed quasi underground terrorism faster? Because that got dark real fast, didn't it? Glenn, will we just circle back around to commercial TV with 50 stations instead of 3? I wonder. I got rid of cable and went to streaming, and the bill went from 150 to our direct TV. I heard it was called a skinny bundle, but our basic channels, went from 150 to 40 in the beginning. But direct TV has more than in 5 years. They've more than doubled the price, 40, 45 to 50. It's like, this is insane. I could see it doing this over 10 years, maybe, but in 4 years, it's doubled in 4 years because AT&T came back. AT&T. To the point where it's like, well, what's the point? Why give up your? It's a it's a much lighter footprint on the technology. You don't have actual physical cable wired everywhere. It's all streaming. And yet it's as expensive as it was of what you gave up. And that's not even talking about your other streaming platform apps, your Netflix and your Prime and your Hulu and your yada da. This is the first time I realized my son didn't have a TV. They just had a projector and projected on the wall. I was like, oh, okay. Now they've got a plasma screen, at least. But yes. Yeah, I kept you all up very late tonight. We'll see how that cuts. Thank you all for letting me get all of that off my chest. I get tired of the two sides bashing each other. No one's right, no one's wrong, but they're both valid. And canonistas are just as valid as shippers. Just want to say, and thematists, the morality folk, and the bottom line is it doesn't have to be a fight. We could have had it all, and we could still have it all, And what we're divided, what is seems like a crossroads now, can be fixed at some future point. I don't know of too many people who still, I know there's some, but most people now do not go back and say, I wish they'd never come up with the explanation for the smooth head Klingons. It's out there, and we are stronger for it. So we'll see. But eventually we'll have to do something about that whole dilithium is the spark plug of warp drive or the filter of warp drive when we have real warp drive without warp factors and dilithium. It's so good to see everybody, man. I have, what do we have? 3.5 hours. We'll have Portal 47's Ask Dr. Trek Roundtable for May. So we'll be back on Tuesday next week. We will have guests next week. In fact, we're going to have several guests coming up in future weeks here as we get settled in. And thank you all so much for being here again with me. And thank you all so much for the support. Thanks so much to all of our TTLers and our live wires. Everybody so much. And if you want to investigate that too, just check out patreon.com/TreklandLive. Why don't I do that? There we go. And it's $5-10 right now. Very easy peasy. A shout out and access to the first few years of Creatives, biographies and interviews that we've done. So thanks for our Patreon folks. And again, remember, if you are intrigued by the idea of a custom away to 4 sites in a day, 6 hours, I'm your concierge, your driver, your props and photo wrangler, whatever you want to do. We work it out ahead of time to your schedule, treklandtreks.com. Of course, you can get to all of it at larrynimachek.com, including the links to everything happening each week, everything like Trek Files now on hiatus, but check out the back catalog. We'll be back in a few weeks, and all the socials. Larry Nemechek on X, Twitter, and Larry's Trekland. YouTube, make sure you hit the bell, do the thing here on YouTube, as well as Instagram is awesome too. Portal47.net if you want to go ahead and look to see. We are getting the rest of the plans together for the rest of the year. Some of you I may see live at Comic-Con, San Diego, and Trek Vegas. It's been an interesting year so far with the changes here on our end and the move, but we continue to settle in, and thanks to everybody with Zooming, we're never too far away, which is why a move was even possible in the first place. But as yesterday, I was just back having Will Rogers meetings at the park. And if anyone's ever in LA, and Sundays usually when I do my tours, but that's all being rejiggered now. So until I get back in a regular schedule there, but being president of the Will Rogers Ranch Foundation, I'm so happy, and there's a lot of exciting things happening in Will Rogers land. We're coming up on the centennial of markers at the park. The property, as Will put it together, happened in the mid-20s and moved and then added on. And we are at the 80th anniversary of the park with Betty, his widow's, deeding it to the state. Is the 80th anniversary this year. We're going to celebrate that. And the 100th anniversary of Route 66 is coming up in 2 years, 2026. Route 66, and the naming of it eventually as the Will Rogers Highway. So we have a tie-in there. It's going to be a fun time there. But of course, it's not exactly like Star Trek is Boringville. We're in so much tumult. And I look forward to talking about that with the Portales tonight and with you all to a less intense degree every week here. Guests are coming up, and I will let you know about them through the week. We have at least 3 guest days coming up here on Tuesdays Live, and I can't wait for that. So stay tuned. Please check out the Patreon. That's awesome too. And the thing I never talk about is I have a cameo. If you would love to surprise somebody for your club meeting or your birthday anniversary, the Trek folks in your life, or that special Trek person in your life, or whatever you would use a cameo video for, I'd love to be Dr. Trek. I'd love to be Dr. McCoy. I've done a lot of DeForest Kelly Dr. McCoys in my time. A little, maybe not so much on the nose there. It's all so much fun. Thank you all for being here with us for a marathon today. Just, stay healthy, do all the things. Stay woke, check your sources, and trek well, everybody. See you next week.